big of a price increase did the U.S. consumer see?
This is a 10% tariff on imported aluminum. How much showed up in your pocketbook, we don't really know, because typically aluminum is going to be bought and put into another product, a beer can, for example, and it could be that the beer manufacturers absorb the cost of that tariff. So we don't know the whole chain of events, but we wanted to find a place where we could get a very clean read on the impact of tariffs on pricing. And those aluminum tariffs were among the first, and they're among the cleanest because that's a globally traded commodity with only a premium put on because of the tariff in the United States.
Doug, what do you think the overall economic impact will be of tariffs? We talked about the fact as to whether or not different guests have come on the show and debated whether or not it will be a drag on the U.S. economy here going forward. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think there are two different questions. I mean, one question is what happens when the United States imposes a tariff, as they did for national security reasons, aluminum and steel, or because of the sort of unfair trade practices, the so-called Section 301 with China. Those have a negative impact on U.S. consumers. They raise the cost of goods. The cost of those tariffs has to be absorbed by somebody, might cause our company have to change its supply lines. These are all costly adjustments, but they're not overwhelming. Anyone who looks at those numbers thinks, it's a pretty big economy, that's not going to do it. The second question, I think the one that we've really been experiencing is, suppose you get engaged in a genuine tit-for-tat trade war with your trading partners, and especially the second largest economy on the globe, then there's retaliation, there's further tariffs and disruption. Everybody starts to grow more slowly. We've seen that in the globe, and the fallout's much, much bigger. I think the latter impacts have been very noticeable in the United States.
Doug, tonight we had the Iowa caucus that's going to get underway. How do you think the tariffs will be addressed? Because I was reading through some of your comments here, and you're saying that the Dems right now are in a bit of a bind.
Well, they are. If you spend any time in Iowa, you will quickly hear about the tariffs and the impact they've had on the U.S. farmer. Farm incomes had been down by about 20% prior to the imposition of the tariffs. There was a lot of damage from them, especially in the soybean producers, and we've seen the Trump administration try to step in and provide some financial assistance to offset that. So you'll hear that, and it would be tempting if you're a Democrat to say, look what a terrible thing this president has done, but attacking China is pretty popular, right? China's not a popular entity. People like the fact that the president took them on. They may not like the tariffs and the fallout, but they like the fact that he took them on. And many of the Democrats have trade policies that are similar to the president. So it's not an easy place for them to be. That you want to acknowledge the damage, but then what do you say you'll do?
Doug, what do you make, or I guess, what do you think of President Trump's approach to tariffs? Do you think they have been effective to a certain extent?
I think I've been a skeptic from the beginning. I think the notion that somehow you can use tariffs as a strategic tool to get people to the bargaining table and thus cut better trade deals, ones which presumably would have lower barriers to both tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade. I think that's a fine theoretical proposition, but I don't think that was ever going to be successful with China. It's just not realistic to expect on a one-on-one basis for the Chinese to visibly lose to the United States and indeed change their laws, as was the initial demand from the Trump administration. So we saw that trade war prosecuted pretty vigorously on both sides. There's now been an agreement to stand down. We're all benefiting from that. But the tariffs haven't gone away, and I think some of the damage to global growth has been done, and we haven't really got much to show for it. And so I'm not convinced that this was a better way to go.
Doug, the other big thing that we've been talking about today is the coronavirus, the potential economic impact. How do you see that playing out?
Right. These typically have two channels. Channel number one is, people get sick and sadly some pass away. That's a permanent loss in the capacity in your economy, and people are watching the public health aspect of that very closely. The second is that fear is a very powerful economic force, and if you're afraid to go outside, you quickly get impacts on restaurants, movies, entertainment, all kinds of retail sectors that constitute a sharp downturn in the economy. We've seen that in the past, fears of avian flu, SARS. We'll see both of those. The third thing is new, and that's China as a very important source of supplies and disruptions in the global supply chain. And I think that's made this harder to gauge. How big an impact is it that Apple, for example, which is operating extensively in China, has essentially shut down everything? That's going to have an impact ultimately, and how big will it turn out to be? We just don't know.
All right, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.